This is the Argument Ninja Podcast, episode 37. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Kevin Delaplante. I hope everyone is doing well. I started working on this episode back in February, before the coronavirus had taken over everyone's lives. But things have certainly changed in that time, so I just want to wish everyone listening the very best. I hope you're doing well. This episode is going to be a little different because I'm going to talk about why this is the first podcast episode I've produced in 7 months. The last episode aired at the end of August of 2019. So it goes without saying, that's not a great update schedule if you're serious about hosting a podcast. But obviously, it invites the question, why has it been so long? What's going on? What does this mean? So in this episode, I'm going to address these questions, and I'm going to be open and honest about a few things that I haven't shared before. I think it's time that I do, because I think it's going to be important for me going forward, and I think it might be helpful to hear for some of you listening. So first, I'm going to talk about what I've actually been doing for the past 6 or 7 months. A big part of it is that I've been experimenting with new directions in my business. And second, I'm going to talk about the lessons I've learned from these experiments. Now, on one level, this is a story about failure. On another level, it's a story about learning and reaching out and connecting, which is definitely not about failure. It's something that was very rewarding to have done. I'm very grateful to have done it. But it's also a story about failure, and that needs to be acknowledged. And third, I'm going to talk about a source of concern and anxiety that has been a part of my life since I was a child, and how that's impacted my efforts over the past 7 months, and what I've learned from reflecting on this. People who are familiar with me personally know this, but if you've only ever listened to my voice on a podcast or on a video, you wouldn't know that I have a speech impediment. I stutter, and I've had a stutter my whole life. So I want to talk about what this has meant for me and my work, because it has had a big effect on my inner psychology and the choices I've made about my online business and how I present myself to the public. And finally, fourth, I'm going to talk about another important part of my work life. It's an opportunity that has occupied a lot of my attention since the new year began, and will continue to be a big part of my life for the foreseeable future. I do believe that when all of this is on the table, you'll see why I need to rethink the direction of the podcast and how I need to fit all the pieces of my work life together so that they support one another rather than work against one another, as they have been for a while. All right, let's start with my situation last summer, going into the fall. Last summer, I moved my wife and son from Ottawa, my hometown in Canada, to Haliburton, a little village about 3 hours west of Ottawa. My son was attending Fleming College, which has a campus there, so this was an excuse for us to move out of the big city to a place that has a much quieter pace of life. I'm happy to report that that part of the story has worked out really well. We really love it here. Now, business-wise, one of the main things I did over the summer was set up a new website, the Argument Ninja website, which was where I planned to consolidate all of my online work, so I wouldn't have to juggle 3 or 4 different audiences spread across 3 or 4 different platforms. I chose Podia as the hosting platform because it could basically recreate the video course structure I had on the Critical Thinker Academy site and integrate it with a membership service that functions a lot like Patreon. So in theory, I could move everyone from the Academy site and my Patreon supporters over to the new Argument Ninja site. Now, I can report that this consolidation effort has only been partially successful. Only portions of these audiences have migrated over, so I'm still managing 3 sets of audiences across 3 platforms. But the more troublesome issue, frankly, was that Podia is still a little thin on the features that I needed to pull this off properly. The platform doesn't have a blogging feature, for example, or a place where I can recreate my podcast show notes and embed the audio files like you can on most other blogging platforms. So that meant I had to hold on to my kevindelaplante.com WordPress site to share any public posts and to host the podcast pages. But I also haven't been happy with the logged in experience for members at the Argument Ninja site. And the company, Podia, doesn't really seem to have that as a priority, at least not right now. And there are other problems. But all of these are mostly just technical issues. They aren't really that important for the story that I want to tell here. Because when we talk about failure, we have to talk about all the new things I had planned to do once we got settled in, but haven't done. The big project, which I had talked about for months before, in the spring and the summer, was that I wanted to create these new Argument Ninja courses that would present my latest thinking on how to develop what I've been calling the Argument Ninja skill stack. These are skills related to reasoning, knowledge gathering, communication, and persuasion, and all their interrelationships. I had topic outlines for this content, and the plan was that in the quiet solitude of Halliburton Village, I could just write these out and have drafts that could then be used to create graphics and eventually videos. So I imagined myself living like a novelist who takes a couple of months off to go to a cottage and just focus on their novel until they have that first draft done. And the other thing I was going to do was I was going to share the drafts of these new modules with my Argument Ninja community. That was, in fact, one of the advertised benefits of signing up, that you could be on the inside track while I was working through these ideas. Well, it's now 6 months later, and I have put in hundreds of hours of work in that time. I actually made a couple of new high-level concept videos about these Argument Ninja courses, which I shared. But for the main project, of actually producing drafts of the course modules themselves, I have, I'll say, about 2 paragraphs of writing to show for it, which is another way of saying I have nothing. So not only did I fail at the one thing I set out to do this fall, I also failed to honor the expectations I had set for my supporters and all the people who've seen those videos. And on top of all that, I failed to put out any new podcast episodes in that whole time. So the natural question is, how did this happen? What interfered with the plan? And what have I been doing with my hundreds of hours of work, if not creating these courses or making podcasts? Well, there are a few parts to this. First, the honest truth is that over the summer, I became worried that if I took a lot of time to work on these new courses without offering more, my supporters were going to start to lose interest and that I'd see more supporters choosing to cancel their subscriptions. And that's not good, since I rely on this recurring support for an important chunk of my income. So to avoid that outcome, I thought it would be a good idea to work on beefing up the community elements of the Argument Ninja membership. Now, this has always been something that I thought of as important for what I want to do. And the timing here seemed right. Having a more active community gives members a reason to stay with me. So I added a closed Argument Ninja Dojo Facebook group, and I added a separate online community forum for those who don't have Facebook accounts or for whatever reason don't want to use Facebook. And then I had the brilliant idea of scheduling online video chats with community members and offering the recordings of those chats as part of the Argument Ninja Dojo membership. Now, I say brilliant because it was a genuinely good idea, and it was a rewarding thing to do, as we'll see. But I also say it sarcastically because it ended up taking a lot more time than I had expected, and that, of course, is part of the problem that we're talking about. Now, another part of this story entered the picture in September when I was contacted by an old consulting client about a new engagement with them. So I'm occasionally asked to do speaking at professional conferences, usually on topics related to cognitive biases and the relevance of understanding and managing bias for the work that people do within a particular industry. So starting back several years ago, I'd given some talks for an organization based in Ottawa that does performance auditing for government organizations. Now, they do training, internal training within their organization, and they have included my notes on cognitive biases within one of those courses. Now, since then, they've added more courses, and for this new engagement, they were looking to have some cognitive bias modules written up that would be tailored to these different courses. So, for example, they have a course on evidence collection and analysis, but they also have a course on managing successful audits, which is about team communication, team leadership, and managing relationships. And they also have a separate course on root cause analysis, which is about methodologies for identifying and diagnosing the causes of negative outcomes. So these are all different domains. They have different subject matters. So it makes total sense to customize the discussion of cognitive biases to best fit the subject matter. So the engagement involved me coming down for a half-day workshop with their team in Ottawa, brainstorming what we wanted to do, and then I'd go away and write up these modules. In fact, I was initially tasked with working on modules for 4 courses, the 3 I just mentioned, and another course on auditing gender equality. Now, I took this engagement. Why did I take it? I took it because I had a good relationship with this organization. The material itself is very interesting and it's right up my alley. And the daily pay rate was higher than anything I was used to. And I needed the money. I had new computer equipment that I needed to buy for the fall. And I had my son's college tuition for the following term to manage. So, long story short, all of us, every one of us, underestimated the work effort that this project required. It's the planning fallacy in action. None of us are immune to it. So after working on the gender bias module for a while, I came to realize that to do this job right, I was effectively going to have to research and write 4 separate substantive articles. And that effort would take longer than the prescribed timeline in the original contract. So we ended up renegotiating the contract for more time, but a limited amount more. Still, it's money that I really had a need for, so I agreed to it, knowing that the number of hours I would have to put in was going to be considerably more than what was budgeted. So this writing gig was a big part of my work schedule in the fall. And it turns out through Christmas and into the new year. In fact, I only wrapped up this project last month in February. So that's an important part of the story. But wait, there's more. In the fall, I had another person reach out to me. This was a long-standing fan and a supporter of my work. And what he wanted to do was set up a career coaching engagement where we would have regular meetings and I could help him with certain work-related challenges. So I visited with him and I thought the engagement could work. He was keen on it. And this was going to be another source of regular monthly income for me, which again, I had a need for. And frankly, I was attracted to the whole idea of personal coaching. I knew it would be a whole new thing, but in the long term, I've always benefited from working with clients from a personal growth standpoint. It's actually been a big influence on my shift toward a more holistic, skills-based approach to critical thinking. So anyway, I agreed to this coaching engagement. Now looking back, I can see that I was feeling insecure about money and thought that accepting these new engagements would help me not worry so much about that. So that's part of it. Now, having said all that, I want to go on record as saying that the relationship I've built with my coaching client has been one of the highlights of all of this. I really do enjoy meeting with his client. I've learned a lot from the relationship, and it's been just really rewarding all around. So on that level, I don't regret it at all. But on other levels, it has contributed to the problem that I'm talking about here, where at the end of 6 months, I haven't done any work on the main creative projects that I set out to do. All right, now I need to return to the topic that I touched on earlier about the community meetings that I arranged with my Argument Ninja Dojo members. This was another situation where I underestimated the amount of work that would go into it. It was also very experimental in the sense that I didn't have a real plan for how these meetings would go. I wanted to treat it as a learning opportunity, which it certainly was. So I advertised these as bi-weekly meetings that would be held on Zoom, which is the video conferencing platform. I would circulate some kind of topic or agenda. We would chat. I'd record the video and then upload the recording to our Argument Ninja Dojo site so that everyone could benefit from the discussion, not just those who attended. And, this isn't an unusual thing to do. I see companies all the time that have weekly webinars where people are invited to attend live. And then there's a link to the recorded webinar that is archived. But in those cases, there's always a clear agenda. and it's usually focused on a particular product or service that a company is selling. And those companies have staff whose job it is to do this kind of community engagement. In my case, the agenda was much less clear. I wanted an opportunity to get to know my supporters on a more personal level, to get a feeling for their individual stories and why they were attracted to the content that I was putting out. And I wanted to see how the video meeting format could be used to create opportunities for members to talk to one another about topics that they share an interest in, and to consider how the platform could be used to set up community organized meetings where I wouldn't necessarily be the one involved or the one setting the agendas. So this is all actually important for what I want to do down the road with the Argument Ninja Academy. Ultimately, figure out a way for people to practice their argumentation and communication skills with other people in an online environment. The big part of that. So I viewed all of this as like ongoing research. And on this level, I did learn a lot. And I really did appreciate meeting some really cool people and getting to know them better. So I just want to give a thanks and a shout out to the people who contributed to those conversations, to Herbert and Collie and John and Brent and Reed and Emil and Alan and Benedict and Hendrik and Dan, David, Bentley, Sean, and all the rest of you that I don't have listed here. Thank you so much. Now, I have to say, I didn't anticipate how much work went into the few meetings that I actually did arrange. For some of them, I produced videos in advance that were designed to seed the discussion, so that took time, obviously. One video I spent almost a week making, and then, no surprise, I discovered while I'm recording that if you have even a few people in the meeting, if everyone is given a chance to share what they want to share and to get feedback from others, then those meetings are going to end up going long. I had originally targeted maybe 60 to 90 minutes for these, but every meeting went long, some as long as 2.5 hours. And then afterward, you've got this 2.5 hour long video to deal with. So putting up the link to a 2.5 hour Zoom meeting didn't seem all that helpful to anyone who wasn't there if there's no chapter markers to highlight what topics are discussed at what times. So what I ended up doing was, admittedly, overboard probably, but I went through the videos in my editing software, cutting them up into smaller chunks that discussed a particular topic during the conversation. Then I posted them as a set of videos on a page in the Argument Ninja Dojo with some bullet point items below each video so that someone coming to the page could scan down and easily find a topic that they might be interested in. And to do that, I had to export all of those segments, which takes time. I had to upload each segment to a video hosting site, which takes time. Then copy and paste the embed code for all of them into a page in order, and then write and add the bullet notes to each one, which takes time. So for each of these videos, it might actually take me a few days of work before the video meeting pages were ready to share. Now, I'm sure half of you listening to this are thinking, Kevin, you're a moron. How could you not see that this would be a problem? And why would you put so much time into this if you knew you had other things you needed to get done? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Why do any of us overcommit? Why do we make overly optimistic predictions for the future? This is about psychology, and this is about self-awareness. I'm trying to document this here because I want to learn from this so I can make changes that will help me avoid these problems in the future. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk now about a topic that I teased in the introduction. I know that most of you are probably interested to hear about because I never talked about it before. But as I said in the introduction, I have a stutter. It's not the most severe stutter you've ever seen, but if I'm talking a lot over the course of a day, you'll notice some vocal behaviors that you would recognize in a stutter, which, just so we have a vocabulary for talking about this, includes things like prolongations. It's when you stretch out a sound. Like if the word is marry and I want to say, will you marry me? A prolongation would be like, will you marry me? And stretch out that sound. I do things with like repetitions. It's when you hit a sound over and over again before you complete the word. Like, will you marry me? That's a repetition. It's a pretty common stuttering pattern. And then there are blocks. Block is when the sound doesn't even come out. All you hear is like a pause or the sound of your speech apparatus struggling to make a sound. So if I was blocking on the word Mary, it'd be like, will you, and then depends, would I ever get to say the word Mary? Like you might hear like a struggle with it, like, will you marry me? You're not even getting through the word while you're blocking. And of course, you can have all of these mixed up and stacked on top of one another. So with all of these, there's tension in the mouth and in the vocal region. And that's the immediate cause of the disruption in speech for a stutterer. Sometimes you'll see that tension in a stutterer's face or their body when they're trying to get something out. You'll see like pursed lips, straining neck, the head might turn, eyes roll or eyes get closed, and so on. And I exhibit all of these behaviors on occasion. Not as frequently as some stutterers, but often enough that if you're around me long enough, you'll see them all. I show a lot of repetitions when I'm a bit excited and searching for words. I often do, that kind of thing when I'm searching for words. That's a very common, that's a repetition. And that's a bunch of repetitions in a row for the word and. My blocks are mostly short. It sounds like speech that has some unusual pauses here and there, like that one. Or if you're watching my face, you might see some tension there as I'm blocking on a word or a sound. A little less often, there was a little repetition. Less often, I'll have a more serious block. And those, if you're a stutterer, what you do is you try to avoid those if you can anticipate them coming, because you don't want to block in front of everyone. So the oldest trick that stutterers learn is switching up words on the fly. Say something other than what you were going to say, and with the hopes that you're not going to block on that other thing. So I do that, or I try to manage it with some kind of vocal technique. So vocal techniques for stutterers are things like slowing down your speech, breathing from the diaphragm rather than from the chest or shallowly, or starting the airflow first as you're breathing out, and then starting to vocalize on the exhale, like that with a hum or whatever. And then there's a gentle onset onto a word. All of these are techniques that you might learn in speech therapy. And when you use all these techniques together, and you're slowing your speech and using them, the full set of techniques can make your voice sound a little bit unnatural. And for me, I always found them less effective in the back and forth flow of a conversation, where my attention gets diverted to the topic and what I want to say, and you basically I forget to pay attention to the technique. So vocal techniques I view as different from what I call masking strategies. And I use a lot of masking strategies too. A masking strategy basically tries to hide a stutter within what other people interpret as the affectations and the non-fluencies of normal speech. So substituting words on the fly is a masking strategy. So is what I think of as strategies for buying time, where what I'm actually doing is blocking on a word or anticipating that I'll block on a word. And I'll use filler words like ums and ahs and other words that we all use and that we often use when we're searching for a word or trying to recall something or organize our thoughts. But sometimes when I look and sound like I'm searching for words or thinking about what I'm going to say, what I'm actually doing is buying time for my brain and my body to deploy a strategy for getting through or around a block. So if I bring home some Guinness beer, my wife asks me what kind of beer I bought, and I think I'm going to block on the word Guinness, that hard G sound. Then I might say something like, I got some Guinness. So where those filler words are actually buying me a bit of time, and the ums and the uhs, they're simultaneously initiating a vocalized airflow that I can then jump on and ride when I start to try to vocalize the G sound, the hard G sound. It's hard to explain, but it's something I do quite a bit without really thinking about it. And I know if there are stutters listening to this, you can identify with some of this at least. So this is something I've been learning to manage my whole life. When I was a kid, I got pulled out of 4th grade class to work with a speech therapist. That was my first introduction to speech therapy. When I was 14 years old, I took a 2-week, all-day intensive speech therapy program with a group of about, 15 other people. That was run out of a local hospital that was really fortunate enough to have such a program at the time. I learned quite a bit there, and I got to meet some people. And I got to meet some people there with much more debilitating stutters than mine. So I learned a lot, but speech therapy wasn't any kind of cure. There's almost universal agreement now among experts that there are brain differences in stutterers compared to non-stutterers, located in parts of the brain that control speech production. The direction of causality isn't entirely clear, but brain imaging over the past 10 years points to a deficit that is more pronounced in people with more severe stutters. So the susceptibility to stutter is at least partly an organic function of the brain that can be affected by a host of other factors, like the speech demand, and your state of physiological arousal, how nervous or anxious you are within a particular speech context. The worst situations for me, and most stutterers, is when there's a speech context where you need to say something specific. So you need to say specific words at a specific time. Like when you're doing introductions in a group, you have to say your name when your turn comes. Or you have to book a ticket to some destination and you have to tell someone the name of the city you're going to. And you have a history of struggles with that name. I've always had issues with my own name. Names are hard for a lot of stutterers because they're a word that you can't substitute. And there are so many speech contexts where you have to introduce yourself or someone else, and often in a public setting. So, my name, Kevin, that starts with a K, the hard C sound, and any word that had that at the front of it became a problem for me, and it's still a problem for me. It's a kind of transference. So, for example, when I worked at McDonald's as a teenager, I could say the word hamburger, but I couldn't say quarter pounder. I blocked on quarter pounder. When I was studying physics in university, I could say thermodynamics, but I couldn't say quantum mechanics or kinetic energy. The K in kinetic energy, I would never dream of even attempting to say that word in a class. I would guarantee that I could not get it out. So technical vocabulary in general can be hard, again, because you can't substitute the words for something else. Like a carburetor is a carburetor. You can't call it something else just because you want to. Another example of this concern is that when I was a teenager, I was terrified at the prospect of getting married and having to say wedding vows in front of everyone. Because the first line is, of course, you have to state your name, to take you, name of your partner. Well, before I was even close to getting married, I actually thought about trying to persuade whoever my partner would be to elope rather than to get married in a public ceremony out of fear that I wouldn't be able to say my name in the vows. I've had blocks in classroom environments and in social environments where I was suddenly struggling to get a word out and really struggling, and everyone's watching me, and someone near me just spontaneously bursts out laughing at me. So I've had those experiences, and those are experiences you don't easily forget. I dropped out of a French immersion program in my 12th grade because my speech in French was so much worse than in English. I mean, it was really painful. Speaking French felt like I had a vice around my neck, squeezing my throat all the time. It really helped me relate better to people who have to live with the more severe stutter all the time. Speaking English after French class I couldn't tell you what a relief it felt. Like the vice had been taken away. And if I had smart things to say in a French class, I couldn't share them. But in English, I could share them. Now, of course, it's not always like that. In more relaxed social environments, my speech is pretty fluent. You could go a long time in those environments without noticing anything unusual. The speech context is the main variable. If I'm going to be interviewed for someone else's podcast, for example, that's usually a high-stress situation for me, and I need to do a lot of preparation if there's even a reasonable chance of that going well. And I've had podcast interviews where they didn't go well, to the point where it was decided that they just wouldn't air the episode. You're not hearing me stutter now for two reasons. One, I'm sitting alone in front of an extensive set of notes. And in this context, I'm pretty fluent. And two, when I'm not fluent, which I'm not, usually at various points when I'm recording any of these things, either a podcast or a video, I'll edit out any distracting blocks or repetitions. Simple as that. Now, I am pretty proud of the fact that as a stutterer, I had a successful academic career in a profession where verbal communication is really important. I gave presentations, I taught classes, I participated in committee meetings, and my department even elected me to serve a term as department chair. Now that's an unusual career for someone who stutters. Overall, about 1% of the adult population has a stutter, but 4 times as many men as women. But that percentage declines rapidly at higher levels of education, and it's much less common among PhD academics. Not because there's any correlation between stuttering and intelligence. It's because the demands of schooling are particularly hard on stutterers. And the farther you go, the more there's an expectation that you can communicate fluently. So it weeds out people with more severe speech impediments. It's the same reason why you won't find as many professional actors or politicians who stutter. There are some, but the percentage is well below the average. If they do have a stutter, it's a mild variety, like a Joe Biden stutter. It's pretty mild. Or as adults, which happens too, they found like a psychological gear where they don't stutter when they're performing. James Earl Jones is like this. He exhibits his stuttering behaviors regularly in informal interviews. When he's performing, something happens and he doesn't do it. It's a kind of freedom to him. I've never seen a newsreader on TV who actively stutters, for obvious reasons. John Stossel, the TV personality, he works with ABC News and Fox News. He's well known for dealing with a stutter when he was younger, but clearly he's found his gear when he doesn't noticeably stutter on camera. You just wouldn't have a career like that if you did. So, I consider myself very lucky. My stutter didn't prevent me from pursuing this thing that I really wanted to do, and that very few stutterers get to do. As a student, I could pull together a good presentation. Visual aids always really helped my speech, and they still do. And I could manage one-on-one conversation pretty well if I'm not too stressed. I was also a pretty effective classroom teacher. Again, I was fluent enough that it didn't prevent me from doing a decent job on the whole. But in the classroom, there was no hiding the fact that I had a stutter. My students saw me on my good days and on my not so good days. And there were days when, for whatever reason, I could barely speak a sentence without some kind of block. I had my tricks for managing my speech so the students weren't always aware when I was blocking, but they all noticed the difference in those days. Couldn't hide it. So, why am I bringing all this up now, talking about my work failures over the past 6 months? Well, it's because I've become more aware of just how much my stutter is part of how I relate to the work I do. And it does play a role in this story. One of the reasons why I was originally attracted to the idea of creating videos and podcast episodes back when I was a university professor is that I liked the idea of creating a teaching artifact that in some way represented a better, more fluent version of me as a teacher. A version of me that sounded more like the scientists and the public intellectuals that I admired, like Carl Sagan, people who were really fluent communicators. As a writer, I could be that guy. Since I was a kid, I found freedom and expression in writing and in drawing. But as an extemporaneous speaker on a public stage, I could be that guy only sometimes. only under the right circumstances, and always with a little luck. I just couldn't trust my speech to function the way I wanted it to consistently. I never knew when it might fail me. And to this day, I still don't know when it will fail me. There are things that I can do to prepare and reduce the odds of serious blocks, but all it does is shift the odds, really. It doesn't guarantee anything. So naturally, I was drawn to the idea of creating an audio version of me, or an audio-visual version of me, that I could share with other people, in which I didn't have to worry about my speech failing me, or of being embarrassed by it, or it being a distraction to the audience. And this is basically what I've done for the past 15 years. But I have to be honest with myself and acknowledge how much it's affected the choices I've made and the kind of work that I've avoided doing or resisted doing because I'm self-conscious about my speech. When I started the community video chats this past fall, I didn't know how they would turn out. I figured it would be a moderately stressful environment for me. I didn't expect to be perfectly fluent. But as I rewatched the video recordings, I was really struck by how often I stuttered and what I looked like when I stuttered, how much it bothered me. I'm used to hearing my own voice. I am not used to seeing myself speaking for an extended period of time, extemporaneously, on camera. Some of my repetitions and blocks were obvious and they were noticeable. A lot of them would only be noticeable to someone who's looking for it. Everyone has disfluencies and affectations in their speech. The pauses and the little ticks that I know are blocks, other people usually interpret differently. I understand this, but it still bothered me. And I ended up going through the videos and editing out the noticeable blocks and repetitions and the facial tics that sometimes go along with them because I just couldn't stand to leave them in. And doing that added an extra chunk of time to processing these 2.5-hour community meeting videos. So what I'm saying is this. Sometimes the production work I do just takes time because I'm trying to maintain a certain degree of craft and quality. But other times, like this, I'm adding to the work because I'm self-conscious about sharing work that reveals all my disfluencies. A certain amount of this I don't really apologize for. I don't think there's anything wrong with creating content that is polished and that focuses on the message without constantly drawing your attention back to the person delivering the message. There is a place for editing and crafting a polished product, and anyone who publishes content knows this. But I have to acknowledge this other force at work, my insecurity, my vanity, my self-consciousness, my fear of being laughed at. My fear of having a permanent record of a contorted face or an embarrassing block or a whole interview filled with such blocks circulating on YouTube or social media and reading negative comments on comment threads about it. These are probably exaggerated fears, but they're not entirely unreasonable fears. And I have to admit that these fears are a reason why I avoid creating certain kinds of content or participating in certain public activities. I don't know what I would do, for example, if Joe Rogan invited me on his podcast for a live 2-hour interview, broadcasted and forever viewable, unedited on YouTube. It might go very well, but it also might not. The anticipation would be very stressful for me. And it's the kind of stress that actually increases the chances of it not going well. So you see the problem. Even these community videos I've done with my own supporters in private video meetings, I found quite stressful. Now, I also know the more that I share like this, the more I talk about this, the easier those kinds of meetings would be, especially amongst my supporters who would be like very welcoming. I know that. But here's the thing that struck me recently as I've been thinking about this. I think I need to be more open about accepting this part of myself, the part that avoids the public eye, and not be ashamed of it. The truth is that for as long as I can remember, I've been drawn to creative work where I, the creator, am not the center of attention. My lifestyle models are artists and writers who can do their creative work in relative isolation and who create a product that is put out into the world for people to interact with and enjoy or to learn from. So cartoonists, authors, painters, bloggers, game designers, craftspeople of all kinds. These are my lifestyle models. Part of it, I'm sure, is introversion. But another part of it is that I'm just attracted to craft and the enjoyment that comes with the practice of a craft that you're good at and that is a medium of expression for you. But a part of my thinking around craft and all of this is that I don't want my craft to be me. I cannot imagine wanting the life of an actor or a celebrity or a YouTube personality or a thought leader or an influencer with a personal brand where you are the product that your fans want to interact with. Now, there are many times in my past when I believed that I should want this. Even recent times when I've been persuaded by people that I respect that someone in my position with my background should be putting myself out there much more than I have been. But this has never been my comfort zone, and my content shows it. I make videos, but I'm rarely featured in them. I don't do vlog-style videos. I'm not a YouTube personality. I make a podcast, but I don't do guest interviews. And I don't have a co-host. Until now, I've been hesitant to talk about why I've made these choices. I haven't always been honest with myself, actually, because I know that I've internalized a certain amount of shame around this issue, because it feels a bit like vanity or cowardice to admit that I avoid doing public interviews or vlogs because I'm afraid of how I'll look and sound. Now, I don't think this is a healthy attitude for me to have. I'm not ashamed to be a stutterer. It's part of who I am. And I'm not ashamed to say that I'm more comfortable working in environments where I don't have to worry about my speech. I'm not ashamed to admit that I have a lane and that I'm happy to stay in it. Anyone can say that I'm hiding behind my scripted podcast and my faceless videos. These are compensating for my speech impediment. But sometimes working within constraints and limitations that you impose on yourself, that's what drives creativity and value. I just can't turn on a microphone and talk like Sam Harris. I'm never going to be that guy. I have to work out what I want to say, and then I have to create something that communicates that as clearly as I can. And within that space of constraints and limitations, I have created something of value that I very likely wouldn't have created if I didn't have a stutter. Here's a review that a listener wrote for my Argument Ninja podcast on iTunes. I'm going to read it to you. Quote, "To say that this is my favorite podcast, and it is not to do it justice. To say that Kevin de la Plante will teach you things that you'll find practical and useful is to sell it short. To say that anyone who truly loves to think about the world will enjoy listening to what he has to say is to understate the case. The content that he's produced over the years has done nothing short of change my whole perspective on the world. I can only hope that more people catch on to this." Unquote. Well, thank you, my dear reviewer, for leaving this. It's an important reminder to me that what I've been doing all these years has value, and it's good enough just as it is. It's also a reminder that my comfort zone is also my zone of excellence. It's where I express what I think from my particular point of view in a way that no one else is doing. It's what makes me unique. So yes, I do have a lane, and I'm happy to stay in it. I'm proud of what I've accomplished in that lane. Now, getting back to the bigger picture about failure, all this talk about how important creating my own content is just highlights how upsetting it is for me to look back over the past 6 months and realize that while I've created a lot of content and done a lot of work, I haven't created any of the content that I set out to do. Something obviously needs to change. But once again, I'm not finished the story yet, because my failure, it gets even worse, and I need to put it all out there. It's bad enough that I haven't created any new Argument Ninja content. It's even worse that I've basically given up on the community building initiative that I started in the fall. I do think, like I said, that it was successful in one important respect. I did get to know some of my fans and supporters much better. We had some really good conversations that I learned a lot from. So obviously none of that is a failure. But in terms of sharing content with my audience on a regular basis, either through social media posts or email newsletters or posts in the community forum or promoting discussion within the community, I haven't been successful at that. And in fact, since December, I've actually retreated from these activities. I had some brief periods when I was active, but then it just trailed off. I don't recall making any conscious decision to stop sharing content on the Dojo Facebook group or in the forum, but I did. I feel quite badly about this, but I'm not talking about this here to apologize for it. I'm trying to understand it. It's not like I'm at a loss for content that I could share. I'm online a lot. I bookmark content all the time. I'm reading. I'm watching videos. I'm writing. I'm taking notes about topics that I'm sure some of my audience would be interested in. I'm constantly thinking about the ideas that I've been creating content around for the past few years, but I'm not sharing any of this. Why not? Well, one answer is that I've recently become much busier with other work, and I question whether I have the bandwidth to do a good job at the community stuff. And that is all true, actually, and I'll explain the other work part shortly. But it's not the whole truth. There's something psychological going on as well. There's different kinds of psychological resistance at work, I think. On the one hand, it feels like resistance to playing the role of community organizer, to be the person who is actively trying to solicit conversations and an engagement within the group. And that, I think, is connected to what I've been talking about here, about not wanting to be the focus of attention. Community building requires consistent interaction and sharing. And if the community builder is also regarded as a quote-unquote thought leader within the group, then those interactions inevitably become interactions with you, and they become interactions about you. People want to know what you think about this or that topic, or this new controversy, or this new book or video, or how you would handle this problem, or assess the situation. Now, there's a bandwidth problem that comes out of this. It could easily suck up all your time if you let it. So that's a real worry. But the other part that I'm starting to see more clearly now is that this just isn't my comfort zone. I've never wanted to be a pundit, for example. I wouldn't be good at it. I don't have much confidence in my off-the-cuff judgments. I don't think my intuitions are worth very much. And I don't want other people to think they are either. When I have an idea that I think might be worth sharing, I have a process for that. And that process takes time. I'll spend a few days or weeks reading about it and writing about it and revising it and shaping it before I'm confident that I actually believe what I'm saying. And then when I do share it, I share the reasoning behind it. So what the audience gets isn't me. It's this artifact that I've constructed in whatever form it's in, be it an article, a podcast episode, or a video that encapsulates that reasoning. And if there's going to be any discussion about it, I want it to be about the reasoning in the article or the podcast or the video. I don't want it to be about me. So this, I think, is one source of the resistance I felt about playing the role of frontline, on-the-ground community builder. It's a role that, if I had the resources, I would happily delegate to other people who are better suited to it. Now, I said there's other kinds of resistance at work here, and I think there is. This one relates to my attitudes towards social media and how I'm comfortable or uncomfortable using social media. I've actually done quite a bit of research on the use of social media as a tool of influence and persuasion, and on the effects of social media on political polarization and the overall well-being of the people who use social media. Now, I'm very aware of the value that social media brings to many people, but I'm also in the camp who believes that the ad-driven business model that all the major players use has pushed them to develop engagement algorithms that amplify messaging that is, on balance, harmful to people individually and harmful to society collectively. The prime directive of these companies is to sell your attention and your personal data to companies and organizations that can profit from it. The harmful side effects are an inevitable byproduct of this directive. Now, this isn't an original idea. Insiders like Tristan Harris and Jaron Lanier have drawn public attention to it recently. But by now, it's practically a truism that social media aggravates polarization and that heavy use is correlated with lower self-esteem and lower life satisfaction. So that's part of it. I'm also influenced by people like Cal Newport and Nicholas Carr and Matthew Crawford, who have argued that our 24-hour digital economy and our ubiquitous connection to this economy, whose currency is our attention, has impaired our ability to think deeply and creatively about issues that are important to us, and that we need to actively take steps to create private spaces where we can do this kind of deep work. I realize I just dropped 5 names. If you want to follow up, here are some of their details. Tristan Harris, along with Azza Raskin, runs the Center for Humane Technology. You can check out their work at humanetech.com. Jaron Lanier, Jaronlanier, is an iconic figure in computers. He's a founding figure of virtual reality technology. He's written many books. And his most recent 2018 book is titled 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. You can find him at jaronlanier.com. Cal Newport is a professor of computer science, and he wrote the books Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World, and Digital Minimalism, Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World. Nicholas Carr is a writer. He writes on technology, business, and culture. He wrote the book The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, among others. And Matthew Crawford is one of my favorite philosophers writing about culture and technology. He's a PhD academic who also used to run a motorcycle repair shop. He wrote the book Shopcraft as Soulcraft, an inquiry into the value of work in 2009. In 2016, he wrote The World Beyond Your Head on Becoming an Individual in the Age of Distraction. And in 2020, I'm looking forward to his new book. It's titled Why We Drive Toward a Philosophy of the Open Road. So these are some of the people whose ideas have seeped into my brain and informed my perception of the modern world we live in today. Of these people, I think only Tristan Harris is active on social media, and only on Twitter from what I can tell. Now I, on the other hand, still consume a lot of social media, and I'm in a somewhat conflicted relationship with it. I do find it incredibly valuable as a portal for learning about what's going on in the world and for following debates and learning about new perspectives. But you do need to make a deliberate effort to counteract the echo chamber filter bubble problem. Otherwise, you risk becoming more partisan and more narrow in your thinking than you were before. So, I intentionally follow people from all across the political and social spectrum. On Twitter, I follow diehard Marxists and socialists, I follow progressive liberals, I follow libertarians, I follow conservatives, and far-right figures of all stripes. You'd be shocked at some of the people I follow. I follow men's rights activists and masculinists, icons of the manosphere, and I follow radical feminists. I follow conspiracy theorists, and I follow critics of conspiracy theories. I follow environmentalists, and I follow environmental critics. I follow scientists, philosophers, artists, writers, journalists, entertainers, entrepreneurs. Over the past year or two, I started following several trans and non-binary gender people on Twitter because I have so little exposure to their perspective in my personal experience. So when a news event hits, I always get a wide range of responses to it in my feed. And that is something that I find genuinely helpful, that I value, and I wouldn't want to give it up. And I bookmark links and the resources that are shared on these sites that I find interesting, and I follow up with them when I have the time. So both as a research tool and as a source of insight into how issues are viewed from different worldviews, I find social media to be extremely valuable. But I'm also very wary of using social media as a medium for communication and persuasion, because that's, I think, where the structural features of the platforms and the prime directive that is responsible for those features systematically distorts communication. And it distorts the sensibilities and the perceptions of the people who use it for these purposes. We set out to use the medium to change the world, to influence the world, but we eventually become creatures of the medium. And it's very hard to be our best selves on social media. And on top of all that, as we know, it's it can be an enormous time suck. So the fact is, I rarely post content on social media. If I have a new podcast episode like this one, I'll post it there, but that's about it. I might like or retweet something occasionally, but I don't use it as a platform for presenting my own views or for persuading people to take a particular stand on an issue. And I don't use it for personal branding or for tribe building, as they say. So following me on social media isn't all that rewarding an experience for my followers. Now, from a marketing standpoint, I understand that I'm wasting an opportunity. But for me, it's part of a cost-benefit calculation. And from a more personal perspective, it's another example of me not wanting to be the focus of attention. If I have, say, 100,000 followers on social media, and I'm regularly sharing content and interacting with my audience on the platform as personal brand marketing would recommend, then I will have become the product that I'm selling. I don't want that kind of attention for all the reasons I just discussed. If I'm thinking about an issue and exploring some resources on it, I don't want 100,000 people looking over my shoulder waiting to see what I'll highlight or comment on. For me, that kind of thinking needs to be done in a private space. I want the freedom to explore an idea, follow it down different pathways, backtrack, change my mind without having an audience scrutinizing every move along the way. And, as I said earlier, I don't think my gut impressions on the news of the day is something anyone should necessarily respect or trust. So this gets us back now to the problem that I raised earlier. In the fall, I started a community building initiative, which included sharing more content on social media, and then I stopped doing that. Why did I stop? Because I think deep down, I felt conflicted about it for all these reasons. It felt like if I start doing this in earnest, I'll have to keep doing it consistently, and I'll feel a standing obligation to never stop. So I had the bandwidth worries that it would suck up too much time and squeeze out other work that was more important. But I also had these other worries about this just not being my comfort zone and about wanting to protect that space of private attention where I'm free to think for myself. So I stopped. I wasn't really aware of why I stopped. Doing this podcast has helped me to better see it for what it is, or at least I think it has. Now, having said all this, what am I planning to do going forward? Well, there's a final chapter to the story that I need to get to that really makes a difference to how I answer that, but I'll spoil the ending for you a bit. I need to get to a place where the bulk of my Argument Ninja work time is devoted to creating content for the Argument Ninja Foundations course, and at least a monthly podcast episode. So that means not accepting any more consulting gigs like the article writing assignment that took me 4 to 5 months to finish. That means not accepting any more coaching clients. And it means suspending the community building activities that I started in the fall. When the content for the Argument Ninja course is finally created and the course is launched, that will be a very different situation for me. And at that point, I expect to have the resources to do this better. That would mean having people who are not me playing some kind of leadership role in organizing and leading community events. But until then, I have to keep my head down, I have to work hard, and just share the content that I'm producing for the course with my supporters. Now, like I said, there's one more chapter in the story that I need to talk about. It's an important one too. I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast, but for the past 2 years or so, I've had a working relationship with Linker Consulting, which is a consultancy firm based out of Minneapolis. I had become friends with its founder, John Linker, and John hired me a couple years ago to do some work on some Linker projects. And that grew into a relationship where I was basically supporting the research and analysis work that a consultancy job might require. So, for example, if the engagement was with a company that was trying to build a new kind of social network or develop the brand for a new space industry recruiting firm, and we as a consultancy wanted to be in a position to advise this company, then we would have to learn enough about the company, the big idea that it represented, and the whole market opportunity so that we could be in a position to make informed recommendations. So part of my job with these engagements was to supervise the research and analysis that this process required to get us up to speed on the ideas and the competitive landscape and all the social and cultural and technological issues that might be relevant, and to help draft summary reports and other documents that encapsulated what we've learned and what insights we could draw from. So these are basically research and writing jobs. But instead of working alone, I'm usually working remotely with a small team of Linker employees and with the clients. So the work is more collaborative, requires some team leadership, some project management, some business communication skills on top of everything else. Now, it turns out this kind of work I actually find really interesting and rewarding. I've always enjoyed working with small teams where the project itself is interesting and the people are smart and capable. And that has always been the case with the engagements that I've worked on with Linker. In every case, I've learned a lot, as you can imagine. I've had to research and write about the psychology of social media use, the reliability and limits of personality testing, the history of the commercial space industry, the history and philosophy behind the positive psychology movement, how powerful industry lobbies can influence government regulations and laws, what the future of personal car ownership looks like, cryptocurrency and the Web3 movement to decentralize the internet, the ethics of marketing, how narrative nonfiction podcasting works, how app development works, how project management works, and the list goes on. So I just want to make clear that I actually enjoy the work that I've done for Linker. Now, what does this have to do with the past 6 months and my failure to make progress on my Argument Ninja projects? Well, I know that what people will expect me to say here is that I've been working on Linker projects this whole time alongside everything else, and that's another reason why I haven't had time to work on my own stuff. But that actually is not true. From July 2019 through December, I did almost no work for Linker. My failure had nothing to do with Linker. My problems came from trying to broaden the range of activities that fell under the Argument Ninja brand and choosing to prioritize the wrong things. And it had to do with the psychological issues that I've shared with you on this episode about the anxiety I experienced around taking on these different roles, these new roles. However, I will say that since January began, I have been working with Linker. So the situation over the past 3 months is actually quite different. My weekly schedule includes quite a bit of Linker work, and it will continue to include a lot of Linker work for the foreseeable future. Now, a reasonable question to ask at this point is, why am I agreeing to do this? If I'm worried about not getting work done on my Argument Ninja projects, and I've set these as a new priority, why would I invite new work into my life? Well, the short answer is that Linker Consulting has changed quite a bit recently. The executive leadership has grown, and I was invited to become a partner in this company. So in this capacity, I wouldn't just be working on client projects for Linker, I would own part of the company. So as you can imagine, this changes the equation considerably. One variable, of course, is that if the company does really well, then I stand to benefit from that in a way that could radically change my financial situation. But, and I want to be clear about this, I would never agree to this if it meant giving up on my personal projects that I've been working on for years. That would be incredibly sad for me. But luckily, no one at Linker wants me to. Everyone there sees the critical thinking, Argument Ninja content that I've developed as valuable and important, and they want to help me carry these projects forward and evolve them to fulfill their potential. They want to be associated with what I do, with my brand. So the deal is that I work on Argument Ninja projects while also working on other Linker projects. And I can treat these Argument Ninja projects as extensions of Linker projects. That means that I can draw upon the additional resources that Linker has as a company to help develop and market the Argument Ninja course and other aspects of that brand. So that means, for example, if I want someone to develop graphics for my courses or do video editing for me or help manage social media for me, I can avail myself of the talented staff at Linker at no charge to me. So you can see the advantages this has. I can start to delegate work that I really shouldn't be doing to other people and focus on the work that really requires my personal attention. So this is where we are right now. I signed on, and I'm now an official partner at Linker Consulting. My title, if you want to know, is Chief Knowledge Officer. I'm in charge of managing the knowledge assets of the company, and among other things, I supervise the research, analysis, and document writing tasks for client engagements. So now, my work commitments are spread across several projects at once. The goal now is to balance those commitments so I can make consistent progress across the board. That's an ongoing challenge because in some respects, Linker has rebooted its brand and its identity with this larger team. So there's a lot of flux in the work. You got to be very adaptive, and it takes planning and focus to get everything done that needs to be done. But for the most part, the work itself fits squarely into my comfort zone as a researcher and a writer. So I'm confident that it'll be better for me psychologically. So far, so good anyway. Well, I think it's about time to wrap up. So where does this leave us now with the podcast and my Argument Ninja projects? Well, my first priority is going to be writing articles for the Argument Ninja Foundations course. Whenever I have free time or can schedule blocks of time, I'll try to make regular progress on that on a regular weekly basis. And I'm going to publish those articles on a new blog site. So that's the good news. We should see some new Argument Ninja content coming down the pike fairly soon. So as of now, my hiatus is over. The bad news is that I'll be suspending the community building projects that I started in the fall, at least until I get into a productive workflow with the new Argument Ninja content, and I can get some support to better manage those projects. And that's really all I can say right now. As you can imagine, I'm pretty gun-shy about over-promising. It's never a good feeling to say you'll do something in public and then fail to do it. And for those of you listening who may be stutterers or know someone who stutters, I hope that the story I shared here might be helpful in some way. I'd love to hear from you if you have any comments. You can follow the links in the episode description, or you can leave a comment from me at kevindelaplante.com. Thank you all for listening. Stay safe, and I hope to talk to you again soon.